Chapter 7. How to lead even when you don't know where you are going. This for every ghetto in the hood. Nas the Don. Supercat the Don Dada, understood. NAS, the Don. After selling the Loudcloud business to EDS, we immediately plunged into a new crisis. Our investors could not understand how selling all of our revenue and all of our customers could possibly leave us with anything worth investing in. As a result, institutional investors sold all of their Opsware shares, and our stock price fell to 35 cents per share. This turned out to be a noteworthy price, because it computed to a market capitalization equal to half of the cash we had in the bank. This signaled that investors believed that the Opsware business had no value, and they further expected us to burn up half our cash before coming to our senses and returning the cash to investors. To make matters more miserable, I received a notice from NASDAQ informing me that if I did not get our stock price above $1 within the next 90 days, they would delist us and we would trade with the penny stocks. I brought this cheery news to the board with 3 options. 1, reverse split. We could reverse split the stock 10:1 and have 10 times fewer shares and a 10 times higher stock price. 2, give in. We could become a penny stock. 3, hit the road. I could go on the road and try to get enough people to buy so that the stock price would triple. The board was extremely sympathetic and open to every option. Andy Ratcliffe pointed out that the negative connotation with reverse splits among investors had lessened due to the sheer number of them. Mark hypothesized that being delisted in a post-newspaper economy might not matter so much. Still, I did not want to reverse split the stock. More than anything, it felt like a capitulation and a dramatic sign of weakness. Reverse splitting would say to the market that I believed we really were worth half the cash that we had in the bank. I also didn't want the company to get delisted. I knew that Mark would be right one day, but I also knew that many institutional investors were prohibited from buying penny stocks in the current day and age. I decided to hit the road. The first big question was, hit the road to go see whom? At that time, most institutional investors wouldn't invest in stocks with prices under $10, let alone under $1. So Mark and I called our networking guru, the famous angel investor Ron Conway, for advice. We told him the story, explaining that the $20 million a year EDS contract alone made the Opsware business worth something, and adding that we had a great team and huge amount of intellectual property, so there was no reason for us to trade a half of cash. Ron listened carefully and then said, I think you should go see Herb Allen. I had heard about Herb's investment bank, Allen and Company, but didn't really know much about him. Allen and Company was famous for running the best business conference in the world. The conference is invitation only and consistently attracts guests whom you will never find at any other conference. People like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Rupert Murdoch are regulars. Allen and Company may attract more top-tier guests than all other business conferences combined. It's that good. Mark and I arrived at the Allen and Company office in Manhattan, located in the Coca-Cola building where Herb's father, Herbert, had served on the board of directors for many years. If a single word could describe the Allen and Company office, it would be classy, beautifully decorated, yet not flashy. The office was both elegant and comfortable. Like his office, Herb himself was both unassuming and classy. He opened the meeting by complimenting Ron, saying that any referral from Ron was personally important to him. Mark and I then carefully took her through the story of Loudcloud, how we had sold the services business to EDS, retaining the software and the key people, and had secured a $20 million a year software license. Beyond that, we had a totally clean balance sheet and were surely worth more than 35 cents per share. Herb listened attentively to the entire presentation and then said, I'd like to be helpful. I'll see what I can do. I had no idea if he meant, as many in Silicon Valley would mean, screw off, I'm not buying a penny stock, or if he meant what he'd said. I soon found out. Over the next couple of months, Allen and Company bought Opsware stock. Herb Allen personally bought Opsware stock, and several Allen and Company clients became major investors. This activity propelled the stock from 35 cents to $3 per share in a matter of months. We'd avoided delisting, rebuilt the shareholder base, and given employees hope. Everything was largely due to a single meeting with Herb Allen. Years later, I asked Herb why he believed in our company at a time when nobody else did. I pointed out that, at the time, Allen and company wasn't very involved in technology, let alone data center automation. Herb replied, I didn't understand anything about your business, and I understood very little about your industry. What I saw was two guys come visit me when every other public company CEO and chairman was hiding under their desk. Not only did you come see me, but you were more determined and convinced you would succeed than guys running giant businesses. Investing in courage and determination was an easy decision for me. That's how Herb Allen does business. And that's why, if given the chance, you'd be a fool not to do business with Herb. Perhaps the most important thing that I learned as an entrepreneur was to focus on what I needed to get right and stop worrying about all the things that I did wrong or might do wrong. This section encapsulates the various parts of those lessons and provides guidance on how to get the important things right. The most difficult CEO skill. By far the most difficult skill I learned as CEO was the ability to manage my own psychology. Organizational design, process design, metrics, hiring, and firing were all relatively straightforward skills to master compared with keeping my mind in check. I thought I was tough going into it, but I wasn't tough. I was soft. Over the years, I've spoken to hundreds of CEOs, all with the same experience. Nonetheless, very few people talk about it, and I have never read anything on the topic. It's like the Fight Club of management. The first rule of the CEO's psychological meltdown is don't talk about the psychological meltdown. At the risk of violating the sacred rule, I will attempt to describe the condition and prescribe some techniques that help me. In the end, this is the most personal and important battle that any CEO will face. If I'm doing a good job, why do I feel so bad? Generally, someone doesn't become a CEO unless she has a high sense of purpose and cares deeply about the work she does. In addition, a CEO must be accomplished enough or smart enough that people will want to work for her. Nobody sets out to be a bad CEO, run a dysfunctional organization, or create a massive bureaucracy that grinds her company to a screeching halt. Yet no CEO ever has a smooth path to a great company. Along the way, many things go wrong and all of them could have, and should have been avoided. The first problem is that everybody learns to be a CEO by being a CEO. No training as a manager, general manager, or in any other job actually prepares you to run a company. The only thing that prepares you to run a company is running a company. This means that you will face a broad set of things that you don't know how to do that require skills you don't have. Nevertheless, everybody will expect you to know how to do them because, well, you are the CEO. I remember when I first became CEO, an investor asked me to send him the cap table. I had a vague idea what he meant, but I didn't actually know what the format was supposed to look like, or what should be included or excluded. It was a silly little thing, and I had much bigger things to worry about, but everything is hard when you don't actually know what you are doing. I wasted quite a bit of time sweating over that stupid spreadsheet. Even if you know what you're doing, things go wrong. Things go wrong because building a multifaceted human organization to compete and win in a dynamic, highly competitive market turns out to be really hard. If CEOs were graded on a curve, the mean on the test will be 22 out of 100. This kind of mean can be psychologically challenging for a straight-A student. It is particularly challenging because nobody tells you that the mean is 22. If you manage a team of 10 people, it's quite possible to do so with very few mistakes or bad behaviors. If you manage an organization of 1,000 people, it is quite impossible. At a certain size, your company will do things that are so bad that you never imagined that you'd be associated with that kind of incompetence. Seeing people fritter away money, waste each other's time, and do sloppy work can make you feel bad. If you are the CEO, it may well make you sick. And to rub salt into the wound to make matters worse, it's your fault. Nobody to blame. You can't blame jazz musicians. Or David Stern with his NBA fashion issues. NAS, hip-hop is dead. When people in my company would complain about one thing or another being broken, such as the expense reporting process, I would joke that it was all my fault. The joke was funny because it wasn't really a joke. Every problem in the company was indeed my fault. As the founding CEO, every hire and every decision that the company ever made happened under my direction. Unlike a hired gun who comes in and blames all the problems on the prior regime, there was literally nobody for me to blame. If someone was promoted for all the wrong reasons, that was my fault. If we missed the quarterly earnings target, that was my fault. If a great engineer quit, that was my fault. If the sales team made unreasonable demands on the product organization, that was my fault. If the product had too many bugs, that was my fault. It kind of sucked to be me. Being responsible for everything and getting a 22 on the test starts to weigh on your consciousness. Too much broken stuff. Given this stress, CEOs often make one of the following two mistakes. 1, they take things too personally. 2, they do not take things personally enough. In the first scenario, the CEO takes every issue incredibly seriously and personally and urgently moves to fix it. Given the volume of the issues, this motion usually results in one of two scenarios. If the CEO is outwardly focused, she ends up terrorizing the team to the point where nobody wants to work at the company anymore. If the CEO is inwardly focused, she ends up feeling so sick from all the problems that she can barely make it to work in the morning. In the second scenario, in order to dampen the pain of the rolling disaster that is a company, the CEO takes a Pollyannish attitude. It's not so bad. In this view, none of the problems is actually that bad, and they need to be dealt with urgently. By rationalizing away the issues, the CEO feels better about herself. The problem is that she doesn't actually fix any of the problems, and the employees eventually become quite frustrated that the chief executive keeps ignoring the most basic problems and conflicts. Ultimately, the company turns to crap. Ideally, the CEO will be urgent yet not insane. She will move aggressively and decisively without feeling emotionally culpable. If she can separate the importance of the issues from how she feels about them, she will avoid demonizing her employees or herself. It's a lonely job. In your darkest moments as CEO, discussing fundamental questions about the viability of your company with your employees can have obvious negative consequences. On the other hand, talking to your board and outside advisors can be fruitless. The knowledge gap between you and them is so vast that you cannot actually bring them fully up to speed in a manner that's useful in making the decision. You are all alone. At Loudcloud, when the dot-com bubble burst and subsequently sent most of our customers into bankruptcy, it crippled our business and devastated our balance sheet. Or rather, that was one interpretation. Another interpretation, and necessarily the official story for the company, was that we still had plenty of money in the bank and were signing up traditional enterprise customers at an impressive rate, which interpretation was closer to the truth. In the absence of someone to talk to, that's a question that I asked myself about 3,000 times. In this case, I had two specific difficult questions. 1, what if the official interpretation was wrong? What if I was misleading everyone from investors to employees? In that case, I should be removed from my position immediately. 2, what if the official interpretation was right? What if I was grinding my brain into sawdust for no reason at all? What if I was taking the company off track by questioning my own direction? In that case, I should be removed from my position immediately. As is usually the case, there was no way to know which interpretation was right until much later. It turned out that neither was actually right. The new customers didn't save us, but we figured out another way to survive and ultimately succeed. The key to getting the right outcome was to keep from getting married to either the positive or the dark narrative. My friend Jason Rosenthal took over as CEO of Ning in 2010. As soon as he became CEO, he faced a cash crisis and had to choose among 3 difficult choices. 1, radically reduce the size of the company. 2, sell the company. Or 3, raise money in a highly dilutive way. Think about those choices. 1, lay off a large set of talented employees whom he worked very hard to recruit and, as a result, likely severely damage the morale of the remaining people. 2, Sell out all of the employees whom he had been working side by side with for the past several years by selling the company without giving them a chance to perform or fulfill their mission. 3. Drastically reduce the ownership position of the employees and make their hard work economically meaningless. Choices like these cause migraine headaches. Tip to aspiring entrepreneurs. If you don't like choosing between horrible and cataclysmic, don't become CEO. Jason sought advice from some of the best minds in the industry, but ultimately he was completely alone in the final decision. Nobody had the answer, and whatever the answer, Jason was the one who had to live with the consequences. So far, his decision to reduce staff by letting go of primarily the most recent hires has paid off. Revenue at Ning is soaring, and team morale is high. If it had gone worse, it would be all Jason's fault, and it would be up to Jason to find a new answer. Whenever I see Jason, I like to say, "Welcome to the show." Jason eventually sold Ning to Glam and went on to become CEO of Lytro. At times like this, it's important to understand that nearly every company goes through life-threatening moments. My partner at Andreessen Horowitz, Scott Weiss, relayed that it's so common that there's an acronym for it, WFIO, which stands for We're Fucked, It's Over. As he describes it, every company goes through at least 2 and up to 5 of these episodes. In all cases, WFIOs feel much worse than they are, especially for CEO. Techniques to calm your nerves. The problem with psychology is that everybody's is different. With that as a caveat, over the years I developed a few techniques for dealing with myself. I hope you find them useful, too. Make some friends. Although it's nearly impossible to get high-quality advice on the tough decisions that you make, it is extremely useful from a psychological perspective to talk to people who have been through similarly challenging decisions. Get it out of your head and onto paper. When I had explained to my board that, since we were a public company, I thought that it would be best if we sold all of our customers and all of our revenue and changed business, it was messing with my mind. In order to finalize that decision, I wrote down a detailed explanation of my logic. The process of writing that document separated me from my own psychology and enabled me to make the decision swiftly. Focus on the road, not the wall. When someone learns to drive a race car, one of the first lessons taught is that when you're going around a curve at 200 miles per hour, do not focus on the wall, focus on the road. If you focus on the wall, you will drive right into it. If you focus on the road, you will follow the road. Running a company is like that. There are always 1,000 things that can go wrong and sink the ship. If you focus too much on them, you will drive yourself nuts and likely crash your company. Focus on where you're going rather than on what you hope to avoid. Don't punk out and don't quit. As CEO, there will be many times when you feel like quitting. I have seen CEOs try to cope with the stress by drinking heavily, checking out, and even quitting. In each case, the CEO has a marvelous rationalization about why it was okay for him to punk out or quit, but none of them will ever be great CEOs. Great CEOs face the pain. They deal with the sleepless nights, the cold sweats, and what my friend the great Alfred Chuang calls the torture. Whenever I meet a successful CEO, I ask them how they did it. Mediocre CEOs point to their brilliant strategic moves or their intuitive business sense or a variety of other self-congratulatory explanations. The great CEOs tend to be remarkably consistent in their answers. They all say, "I didn't quit." The fine line between fear and courage. I tell my kids, what is the difference between a hero and a coward? What is the difference between being yellow and being brave? No difference. Only what you do. They both feel the same. They both fear dying and getting hurt. The man who is yellow refuses to face up to what he's got to face. The hero is more disciplined, and he fights those feelings off, and he does what he has to do. But they both feel the same, the hero and the coward. People who watch you judge you on what you do, not how you feel. Cuz D'Amato, legendary boxing trainer. When my partners and I meet with entrepreneurs, the 2 key characteristics that we look for are brilliance and courage. In my experience as CEO, I found that the most important decisions tested my courage far more than my intelligence. The right decision is often obvious, but the pressure to make the wrong decision can be overwhelming. It starts with small things. When founders come in to pitch our firm, one as the CEO and the other as president, the conversation often goes like this. Who is running the company? We are. They both say. Who makes the final decision? We do. How long do you expect to run that way? Forever. So you decided to make it more difficult for every employee to get work done so that you don't have to decide who is in charge. Is that right? That usually results in silence. Intellectually, it should be clear that it is easier for employees to go to one decision maker than two. It's not really very complicated at all. Unfortunately, the clear and present social pressure often overwhelms the long-term benefits of organizing the company properly. Because the founders do not have the courage to decide who is in charge, every employee suffers the inconvenience of double approval. More important, decisions only get scarier as a company grows. When we decided to take Loudcloud public with only $2 million in revenue, it was not a hard choice intellectually. The alternative was to go bankrupt. It was nonetheless terrifying to do something that most employees, everyone in the press, and many investors thought was nuts. When making the right choice requires intelligence and courage. Sometimes the decision itself is rather complicated, which makes the courage challenge even more difficult. CEOs possess a different set of data, knowledge, and perspective than anybody else in the company. Frequently, some of the employees and board members are more experienced and more intelligent than the CEO. The only reason the CEO can make a better decision is her superior knowledge. To make matters worse, when a CEO faces a particularly difficult decision, she may have only a slight preference for one choice over another. Say 54% kill a product line, 46% keep it. If the really smart people on the board and on her staff take the other side, her courage will be severely tested. How could she kill the product when she is not even sure if she is making the right decision, and everyone is against her? If she's wrong, she will have been wrong in the face of advice from her top advisors. If she is right, will anybody even know? Recently, a large company offered to buy one of our portfolio companies. The deal was lucrative and compelling given the portfolio company's progress to date and revenue level. The founder CEO thought that selling did not make sense due to the giant market opportunity that he was pursuing, but he still wanted to make sure that he made the best possible choice for investors and employees. Hamlet wanted to reject the offer, but only marginally. To complicate matters, most of the management team and the board thought the opposite. It did not help that the board and the management team were far more experienced than Hamlet. As a result, Hamlet spent many sleepless nights worrying about whether he was right. He realized that it was impossible to know. This did not help him sleep. In the end, Hamlet made the best and most courageous decision he could and did not sell the company. I believe that will prove to be the defining moment of his career. Interestingly, as soon as Hamlet made the decision, the entire board and executive team immediately embraced the choice. Why? If they wanted to sell the company enough to advise the CEO to give up his dream, how could they reverse themselves so quickly? It turns out that the most important data point driving their earlier preference for selling the company was Hamlet's initial ambivalence. The team supported the decision they thought the CEO wanted. Hamlet did not realize this and interpreted their desire to sell to be the result of a thorough analysis. Luckily for everybody involved, he had the courage to make the right decision. On the surface, it appears that if the decision is a close call, it's much safer to go with the crowd. In reality, if you fall into this trap, the crowd will influence your thinking and make a 70-30 decision seem like a 51-49 decision. This is why courage is critical. Courage, like character, can be developed. In all the difficult decisions that I made through the course of running Loudcloud and Opsware, I never once felt brave. In fact, I often felt scared to death. I never lost those feelings, but after much practice, I learned to ignore them. That learning process might also be called the courage development process. In life, everybody faces choices between doing what's popular, easy, and wrong versus doing what's lonely, difficult, and right. These decisions intensify when you run a company because the consequences get magnified 1,000-fold. As in life, the excuses for CEOs making the wrong choice are always plentiful. Life excuse, CEO excuse. Other smart people made the same mistake. It was a close call. All my friends wanted to do it. The team was against me, and I couldn't go against the team. All the cool kids are doing it. It was industry best practice. I didn't realize it was illegal. It wasn't perfect, so I decided not to compete. We never achieved total product market fit, so we never tried to sell our product. Every time you make the hard, correct decision, you become a bit more courageous, and every time you make the easy, wrong decision, you become a bit more cowardly. If you are CEO, these choices will lead to a courageous or cowardly company. Last thought. Over the past 10 years, technological advances have dramatically lowered the financial bar for starting a new company. But the courage bar for building a great company remains as high as it has ever been. Ones and twos. Jim Collins, in his best-selling book Good to Great, demonstrates through massive research and comprehensive analysis that when it comes to CEO succession, internal candidates dramatically outperform external candidates. The core reason is knowledge. Knowledge of technology, prior decisions, culture, personnel, and more tend to be far more difficult to acquire than the skills required to manage a larger organization. Collins does not, however, explain why internal candidates sometimes fail as well. I will attempt to do so here. I will focus the discussion on two core skills for running an organization. First, knowing what to do. Second, getting the company to do what you know. While being a great CEO requires both skills, most CEOs tend to be more comfortable with one or the other. I call managers who are happier setting the direction of the company ones, and those who more enjoy making the company perform at the highest level twos. What ones like and don't like. Ones like spending most of their time gathering information from a broad variety of sources, from employees to customers to competitors. Ones love making decisions. Although they prefer to have comprehensive information when they make a decision, they comfortably make decisions with very little information when necessary. Ones have great strategic minds and enjoy nothing more than a good game of 8-dimensional chess against their best competitors. Ones sometimes get bored with many of the important execution details required to run a company, such as process design, goal setting, structured accountability, training, and performance management. Most founding CEOs tend to be ones. When founding CEOs fail, a significant reason is that they never invested the time to be competent enough in the two tasks to direct those activities effectively. The resulting companies become too chaotic to reach their full potential, and the CEO ends up being replaced. What twos like and don't like. Twos, on the other hand, thoroughly enjoy the process of making the company run well. They insist upon super clear goals and strongly prefer not to change goals or direction unless absolutely necessary. Twos like to participate in strategic discussions, but often have difficulty with the strategic thinking process itself. Where one might be perfectly comfortable spending one day a week reading, studying, and thinking, doing so would make a two very nervous, because it would not feel like work to them. A two would get antsy at the thought of all the processes that might be improved, people who might be held accountable to achieving the standard, or sales calls that could be made while he was wasting time just thinking about strategy. Big decisions worry twos much more than they worry ones. Circumstances often force both ones and twos to make critical decisions with insufficient data, but ones generally feel fine about doing that, and do not get overly anxious about the consequences. Twos, by contrast, can become highly agitated about such things and sometimes overcomplicate the decision-making process in order to provide a false feeling of thoroughness about the choice. CEOs who are twos, despite their love of action, can sometimes bring decision-making in a company to a halt. You need both characteristics to be a good CEO. While people tend to be ones or twos, with discipline and hard work, natural twos can be competent at one task, and ones can be competent at two tasks. If a CEO ignores a dimension of management she doesn't like, she generally fails. Ones end up in chaos, and twos fail to pivot when necessary. Functional ones. Often two executives act as ones for their functions, but twos as members of the executive team. For example, the head of sales might easily make all the decisions that are local to the sales organization, but prefer to take direction with respect to the overall company plans. This is the best kind of multi-layer leadership possible, because directions are clear and decisions are made rapidly with precision. How organizations tend to be constructed. The primary purpose of the organizational hierarchy in a company is decision-making efficiency. It follows that most CEOs tend to be ones. If the person at the top of the decision-making hierarchy doesn't like making extremely complex decisions, the company's processes will be slow and unwieldy. If you're a one, it can be counterproductive to have another one on your staff because she will want to set her own direction rather than follow yours. This kind of strategic contention can confuse the organization and send employees in opposing directions. As a result, many great one CEOs employ primarily twos and functional ones on their staff. What happens at succession? This brings us to the question of succession. Since most organizations are run by ones and have a team of twos reporting to them, replacing the CEO can be extremely tricky. Do you promote someone from the executive staff even though they are likely a two? Microsoft did this in 2000 when they replaced Bill Gates, a prototypical one, with Steve Ballmer literally his number two. Or do you reach deep into the organization and pull a one from a level lower where they are likely to exist? General Electric famously did this with Jack Welch in 1981. It was an incredibly bold move by GE. Not only did they promote an executive 2 levels down in the organizational chart past all of his superiors, but in doing so they named the youngest CEO in the history of GE. It's difficult for most board members to even conceive of the possibility that there is a one deep in the organization who is more qualified to run the company than anyone on the executive staff. Both methods can be problematic. The first approach leaves the company in the charge of a two. As the company faces forks in the road, decision-making may slow down and the company may lose its edge. In addition, the natural ones will eventually leave. In scenario 2, by promoting someone past everyone on the executive team and making them CEO, you will likely cause massive turnover of the executive staff. In fact, in very short order, almost none of the original GE executives remained under Welch. In a diversified conglomerate like GE, this kind of rough transition is possible. For companies in the highly dynamic technology business, the super high turnover scenario is more dangerous. The big conclusion. The big conclusion will be a big disappointment for those looking for an answer. The answer is there is no easy answer. CEO transition is hard. If you bring people in from the outside, you lower your chances for success. If you promote from within, you must deal with the 1-2 phenomenon. Ideally, you'll promote a one, and the rest of the executive team will be glad you did. Two bad things are rarely ideal. Follow the leader. There is no prototype for the perfect CEO. Radically different styles, think Steve Jobs, Bill Campbell, and Andy Grove, can all lead to great outcomes. Perhaps the most important attribute required to be a successful CEO is leadership. So what is leadership, and how do we think about it in the context of the CEO job? Are great leaders born or made? Most people define leadership in the same way that Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart famously defined pornography when he said, "I know it when I see it." For our purposes, we can generalize this to be the measure of the quality of a leader, the quantity, quality, and diversity of people who want to follow her. So what makes people want to follow a leader? We look for 3 key traits. The ability to articulate the vision, the right kind of ambition. The ability to achieve the vision. Let's take these in order. The ability to articulate the vision, the Steve Jobs attribute. Can the leader articulate a vision that's interesting, dynamic, and compelling? More important, can the leader do this when things fall apart? More specifically, when the company gets to a point when it does not make financial sense for any employee to continue working there, will the leader be able to articulate a vision that's compelling enough to make people stay? I believe Jobs' greatest achievement as a visionary leader was in getting so many super talented people to continue following him at Next, long after the company lost its patina, and in getting the employees of Apple to buy into his vision when the company was weeks away from bankruptcy. It's difficult to imagine any other leader being so compelling that he could accomplish these goals back to back, and this is why we call this one the Steve Jobs attribute. The right kind of ambition, the Bill Campbell attribute. One of the biggest misperceptions in our society is that a prerequisite for becoming a CEO is to be selfish, ruthless, and callous. In fact, The opposite is true, and the reason is obvious. The first thing that any successful CEO must do is get really great people to work for her. Smart people do not want to work for people who do not have their interests in mind and in heart. Most of us have experienced this in our careers. A bright, ambitious, hard-working executive whom nobody good wants to work for, and who, as a result, delivers performance far worse than one might imagine. Truly great leaders create an environment where the employees feel that the CEO cares more about the employees than she cares about herself. In this kind of environment, an amazing thing happens. A huge number of employees believe it's their company and behave accordingly. As the company grows large, these employees become quality control for the entire organization. They set the work standard that all future employees must live up to. As in, hey, you need to do a better job on that data sheet. You're screwing up my company. I call this characteristic the Bill Campbell attribute after the man who is the best I've ever seen at this. If you talk to people who worked in any of the many organizations that Bill has run, they refer to those organizations as my organization or my company. A huge part why he's been so remarkably strong in this dimension of leadership is that he's completely authentic. He would happily sacrifice his own economics, fame, glory, and rewards for his employees. When you talk to Bill, you get the feeling that he cares deeply about you and what you have to say, because he does. And all of that shows up in his actions and follow-through. The ability to achieve the vision, the Andy Grove attribute. The final leg of our leadership stool is competence, pure and simple. If I buy into the vision and believe that the leader cares about me, do I think she can actually achieve the vision? Will I follow her into the jungle with no map forward or back and trust that she will get me out of there? I like to refer to this as the Andy Grove attribute. Andy Grove will always be my model of CEO competence. He earned a Ph.D. in electrical engineering, wrote the best management book I've ever read, and tirelessly refined his craft. Not only did he write exceptional books on management, but he taught management classes at Intel throughout his tenure. In his classic book, Only the Paranoid Survive, Grove tells how he led Intel through the dramatic transition from the memory business to the microprocessor business. In making that change, he walked away from nearly all his revenue. He humbly credits others in the company with coming to the strategic conclusion before he did, but the credit for swiftly and successfully leading the company through the transition goes to Dr. Grove. Changing your primary business as a 16-year-old large public company raises a lot of questions. Andy describes an incident with one of his employees. One of them attacked me aggressively, asking, "Does it mean that you can conceive of Intel without being in the memory business?" I swallowed hard and said, "Yes, I guess I can." All hell broke loose. Despite shocking many of his best employees with this radical strategy, ultimately the company trusted Andy. They trusted him to rebuild their company around an entirely new business. That trust turned out to be very well placed. So are great leaders born or made? Let's look at this one attribute at a time. Articulating the vision, there is no question that some people are much better storytellers than others. However, it is also true that anybody can greatly improve in this area through focus and hard work. All CEOs should work on the vision component of leadership. Alignment of interests, I am not sure if the Bill Campbell attribute is impossible to learn, but I am pretty sure that it is impossible to teach. Of the three, this one most fits the Bill born not made. Ability to achieve the vision, this attribute, can absolutely be learned. Perhaps this is why Andy Grove's tolerance for incompetence was legendarily low. Indeed, the enemy of competence is sometimes confidence. A CEO should never be so confident that she stops improving her skills. In the end, some attributes of leadership can be improved more than others, but every CEO should work on all three. Furthermore, each attribute enhances all three. If people trust you, they will listen to your vision, even if it is less articulate. If you are super competent, they will trust you and listen to you. If you can paint a brilliant vision, people will be patient with you as you learn the CEO skills and give you more leeway with respect to their interests. Peacetime CEO, wartime CEO. Bill Campbell always used to say to me, "Ben, you're the best CEO that I work with." This always seemed crazy to me. because he was working with Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and Eric Schmidt at the time while my company was going straight into the wall. One day I called him on it and said, "Bill, why would you say that? Do results not count?" He said, "There are lots of good peacetime CEOs and a lot of good wartime CEOs, but almost no CEOs that can function in both peacetime and in wartime. You're a peacetime wartime CEO." By my calculation, I was a peacetime CEO for 3 days and wartime CEO for 8 years. I still have a hard time shaking the wartime flashbacks. I'm not the only one who has experienced this. Dennis Crowley, the founder of Foursquare, told me that he thinks about this tension between wartime and peacetime every day. The same goes for a lot of tech companies. For instance, when Eric Schmidt stepped down as CEO of Google and founder Larry Page took over, much of the news coverage focused on Page's ability to be the face of Google, since Page is far more shy and introverted than gregarious and articulate Schmidt. While an interesting issue, this analysis misses the main point. Schmidt was much more than Google's frontman. As Google's peacetime chief executive, he led the greatest technology business expansion in the last 10 years. Larry Page, in contrast, seems to have determined that Google is moving into war, and he clearly intends to be a wartime CEO. This has been a profound change for Google and the entire high-tech industry. Definitions and examples. Peacetime in business means those times when a company has a large advantage over the competition in its core market, and its market is growing. In times of peace, the company can focus on expanding the market and reinforcing the company's strengths. In wartime, a company is fending off an imminent existential threat. Such a threat can come from a wide range of sources, including competition, dramatic macroeconomic change, market change, supply chain change, and so forth. The great wartime CEO Andy Grove marvelously describes the forces that can take a company from peacetime to wartime in his book, Only the Paranoid Survive. A classic peacetime mission is Google's effort to make the internet faster. Google's position in the search market is so dominant that they determine that anything that makes the internet faster accrues to their benefit, since it enables users to do more searches. As the clear market leader, they focus more on expanding the market than dealing with their search competitors. In contrast, a classic wartime mission was Andy Grove's drive to get out of the memory business in the mid-1980s due to an irrepressible threat from the Japanese semiconductor companies. In this mission, the competitive threat, which could have bankrupted the company, was so great that Intel had to exit its core business, which employed 80% of its staff. My greatest management discovery through the transition was that peacetime and wartime require radically different management styles. Interestingly, most management books describe peacetime CEO techniques, and very few describe wartime. For example, a basic principle in most management books is that you should never embarrass an employee in a public setting. On the other hand, in a room filled with people, Andy Grove once said to an employee who entered the meeting late, "All I have in this world is time, and you are wasting my time." Why such different approaches to management? In peacetime, leaders must maximize and broaden the current opportunity. As a result, peacetime leaders employ techniques to encourage broad-based creativity and contribution across a diverse set of possible objectives. In wartime, by contrast, the company typically has a single bullet in the chamber and must, at all costs, hit the target. The company's survival in wartime depends upon strict adherence and alignment to the mission. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple, the company was weeks away from bankruptcy, a classic wartime scenario. He needed everyone to move with precision and follow his exact plan. There was no room for individual creativity outside the core mission. In stark contrast, as Google achieved dominance in the search market, Google's management fostered peacetime innovation by enabling and even requiring every employee to spend 20% of their time on their own new projects. Peacetime and wartime management techniques can both be highly effective when employed in the right situations, but they are very different. The peacetime CEO does not resemble the wartime CEO. Peacetime CEO, wartime CEO. Peacetime CEO knows that proper protocol leads to winning. Wartime CEO violates protocol in order to win. Peacetime CEO focuses on the big picture and empowers her people to make detailed decisions. Wartime CEO cares about a speck of dust on a gnat's ass if it interferes with the prime directive. Peacetime CEO builds scalable, high-volume recruiting machines. Wartime CEO does that, but also builds HR organizations that can execute layoffs. Peacetime CEO spends time defining the culture. Wartime CEO lets the war define the culture. Peacetime CEO always has a contingency plan. Wartime CEO knows that sometimes you gotta roll a hard 6. Peacetime CEO knows what to do with a big advantage. Wartime CEO is paranoid. Peacetime CEO strives not to use profanity. Wartime CEO sometimes uses profanity purposefully. Peacetime CEO thinks of the competition as other ships in a big ocean that may never engage. Wartime CEO thinks the competition is sneaking into her house and trying to kidnap her children. Peacetime CEO aims to expand the market. Wartime CEO aims to win the market. Peacetime CEO strives to tolerate deviations from the plan when coupled with effort and creativity. Wartime CEO is completely intolerant. Peacetime CEO does not raise her voice. Wartime CEO rarely speaks in a normal tone. Peacetime CEO works to minimize conflict. Wartime CEO heightens the contradictions. Peacetime CEO strives for broad-based buy-in. Wartime CEO neither indulges consensus building nor tolerates disagreements. Peacetime CEO sets big, hairy, audacious goals. Wartime CEO is too busy fighting the enemy to read management books written by consultants who have never managed a fruit stand. Peacetime CEO trains her employees to ensure satisfaction and career development. Wartime CEO trains her employees so they don't get their asses shot off in the battle. Peacetime CEO has rules like, we're going to exit all businesses where we're not number 1 or 2. Wartime CEO often has no businesses that are number 1 or 2, and therefore does not have the luxury of following that rule. Can a CEO be both? Can a CEO build the skill sets to lead in both peacetime and wartime? One could easily argue that I failed as a peacetime CEO, but succeeded as a wartime one. John Chambers had a great run as peacetime CEO of Cisco, but has struggled as Cisco has moved into war with Juniper, HP, and a range of new competitors. Steve Jobs, who employed a classical wartime management style, removed himself as CEO of Apple in the 1980s during their longest period of peace before coming back to Apple for a spectacular run more than a decade later, during their most intense war period. I believe that the answer is yes, but it's hard. Mastering both wartime and peacetime skill sets means understanding the many rules of management and knowing when to follow them and when to violate them. Be aware that management books tend to be written by management consultants who study successful companies during their times of peace. As a result, the resulting books describe the methods of peacetime CEOs. In fact, other than the books written by Andy Grove, I don't know of any management books that teach you how to manage in wartime like Steve Jobs or Andy Grove. Back to the beginning. It turned out that a little wartime was just what the doctor ordered for Google. Page's precise and exacting leadership has led to brilliant execution in integrating identity across Google's broad product line, from the rise of Android to brilliant new products like Google Glass. Sometimes you need to go to war, making yourself a CEO. The other day, a friend of mine asked me whether CEOs were born or made. I said, that's kind of like asking if Jolly Ranchers are grown or made. CEO is an unnatural job. The surprised look on his face made me realize that perhaps it wasn't as obvious as I'd originally thought. Most people actually assume the opposite. CEOs are born, not made. I often listen as other venture capitalists and board members rapidly evaluate a founder and conclude that she's not CEO material. I am not sure how they figure these things out so fast. It generally takes years for a founder to develop the CEO's skill set, and it is usually extremely difficult for me to tell whether she will make it. In athletics, some things, like becoming a sprinter, can be learned relatively quickly because they start with natural motion and refine it. Others, like boxing, take much longer to master because they require lots of unnatural motions and lots of specific technique. For example, as I mentioned earlier, when going backward in boxing, it's critically important to pick up your back foot first, because if you get hit while walking backward the natural way, picking up your front foot first, it often leads to getting knocked cold. Learning to make this unnatural motion feel natural takes a great deal of practice. If you do what feels most natural as a CEO, you may also get knocked cold. Being CEO requires lots of unnatural motion. From an evolutionary standpoint, it is natural to do things that make people like you. It enhances your chances for survival. Yet to be a good CEO, in order to be liked in the long run, you must do many things that will upset people in the short run. Unnatural things. Even the most basic CEO building blocks will feel unnatural at first. If your buddy tells you a funny story, it would feel quite weird to evaluate her performance. It would be totally unnatural to say, "Gee, I thought that story really sucked. It had potential, but you were underwhelming on the build-up, and then you totally flubbed the punchline. I suggest that you go back, rework it, and present it to me again tomorrow." Doing so would be quite bizarre, but evaluating people's performances and constantly giving feedback is precisely what a CEO must do. If she doesn't, the more complex motions such as writing reviews, taking away territory, handling politics, setting compensation, and firing people will be either impossible or handled rather poorly. Giving feedback turns out to be the unnatural atomic building block atop, which the unnatural skill set of management gets built. But how does one master the unnatural, the shit sandwich? A popular and sometimes effective technique for feedback beginners is something that experienced managers call the shit sandwich. The technique is marvelously described in the classic management text, The 1-Minute Manager. The basic idea is that people open up to feedback far more if you start by complimenting them, then you give them the difficult message, then wrap up by reminding them how much you value their strengths. The shit sandwich also has a positive side effect of focusing the feedback on the behavior rather than the person, because you establish up front that you really value the person. This is a key concept in giving feedback. The shit sandwich can work well with junior employees, but has the following challenges. It tends to be overly formal, because you have to pre-plan and script the sandwich to make it come out correctly. The process can feel formal and judgmental to the employee. After you do a couple of times, it will lack authenticity. The employee will think, "Oh boy, she's complimenting me again. I know what's coming next, the shit." More senior executives will recognize a shit sandwich immediately, and it will have an instant negative effect. Early in my career, I attempted to deliver a carefully crafted shit sandwich to a senior employee, and she looked at me like I was a little kid and said, "Spare me the compliment, Ben, and just tell me what I did wrong." At that point, I thought that I was definitely not born to be a CEO. The keys. To become a lead at giving feedback, you must elevate yourself beyond a basic technique, like the shit sandwich. You must develop a style that matches your own personality and values. Here are the keys to being effective. Be authentic. It's extremely important that you believe in the feedback that you give and not say anything to manipulate the recipient's feelings. You can't fake the funk. Come from the right place. It's important that you give people feedback because you want them to succeed and not because you want them to fail. If you really want someone to succeed, then make her feel it. Make her feel you. If she feels you and you are in her corner, then she will listen to you. Don't get personal. If you decide to fire somebody, fire her. Don't prepare her to get fired. Prepare her to succeed. If she doesn't take the feedback, that's a different conversation. Don't clown people in front of their peers. While it's okay to give certain kinds of feedback in a group setting, you should strive never to embarrass someone in front of their peers. If you do so, then your feedback will have little impact other than to cause the employee to be horribly ashamed and to hate your guts. Feedback is not one size fits all. Everybody is different. Some employees are extremely sensitive to feedback, while others have particularly thick skin and often thick skulls. Stylistically, your tone should match the employee's personality, not your mood. Be direct, but not mean. Don't be obtuse. If you think somebody's presentation sucks, don't say, "It's really good, but could you use one more pass to tighten up the conclusion?" While it may seem harsh, it's much better to say, "I couldn't follow it, and I understand your point, and here are the reasons why." Watered-down feedback can be worse than no feedback at all, because it's deceptive and confusing to the recipient. But don't beat them up or attempt to show your superiority. Doing so will defeat your purpose because when done properly, feedback is a dialogue, not a monologue. Feedback is a dialogue, not a monologue. You may be the CEO and you may be telling somebody about something that you don't like or disagree with. But that doesn't mean you're right. Your employee should know more about her function than you. She should have more data than you. You may be wrong. As a result, your goal should be for your feedback to open up rather than close down discussion. Encourage people to challenge your judgment and argue the point to conclusion. Culturally, you want high standards thoroughly discussed. You want to apply tremendous pressure to get the highest quality thinking, yet be open enough to find out when you are wrong. High-frequency feedback. Once you've mastered the keys, you should practice what you've mastered all the time. As CEO, you should have an opinion on absolutely everything. You should have an opinion on every forecast, every product plan, every presentation, and even every comment. Let people know what you think. If you like someone's comment, give her the feedback. If you disagree, give her the feedback. Say what you think. Express yourself. This will have two critically important positive effects. Feedback won't be personal in your company. If the CEO constantly gives feedback, then everyone she interacts with will just get used to it. Nobody will think, gee, what did she really mean by that comment? Does she not like me? Everybody will naturally focus on the issues, not an implicit random performance evaluation. People become comfortable discussing bad news. If people get comfortable talking about what each other are doing wrong, then it will be very easy to talk about what the company is doing wrong. High-quality company cultures get their cue from data networking routing protocols. Bad news travels fast, and good news travels slowly. Low-quality company cultures take on the personality of the wicked, which are the West and the Wiz. Don't nobody bring me no bad news. Making the CEO. Being CEO also requires a broad set of more advanced skills, but the key to reaching the advanced level and feeling like you were born to be CEO is mastering the unnatural. If you are a founder CEO and you feel awkward or incompetent when doing some of these things, and believe there's no way that you'll be able to do it when your company is 100 or 1,000 people, welcome to the club. That's exactly how I felt. So did every CEO I've ever met. This is the process. This is how you get made. How to evaluate CEOs. No position in a company is more important than the CEO, and as a result, no job gets more scrutiny. The job is so poorly defined that you can end up doing all kinds of nutty things. Sadly, little of this analysis that's been done benefits CEOs, since most of the discussions happen behind their backs. Here I want to take a step in the opposite direction. By describing how I evaluate CEOs, I am at the same time describing what I think the job of the CEO is. Here are the key questions we ask. 1. Does the CEO know what to do? 2. Can the CEO get the company to do what she knows? 3. Did the CEO achieve the desired results against an appropriate set of objectives? 1. Does the CEO know what to do? One should interpret this question as broadly as possible. Does the CEO know what to do in all matters all the time? This includes matters of personnel, financing, product strategy, goal sizing, and marketing. At a macro level, does the CEO set the right strategy for the company and know its implications in every detail of the company? I evaluate two distinct facets of knowing what to do. Strategy in good companies. The story and the strategy are the same thing. As a result, the proper output of all the strategic work is the story. Decision-making at the detailed level. The output of knowing what to do is the speed and quality of the CEO's decisions. The strategy and the story. The CEO must set the context within which every employee operates. The context gives meaning to the specific work that people do, aligns interests, enables decision-making, and provides motivation. Well-structured goals and objectives contribute to the context, but they do not provide the whole story. More to the point, they are not the story. The story of the company goes beyond quarterly or annual goals and gets to the hardcore question of why. Why should I join this company? Why should I be excited to work here? Why should I buy its product? Why should I invest in the company? Why is the world better off as a result of this company's existence? When a company clearly articulates its story, the context for everyone, employees, partners, customers, investors, and the press, becomes clear. When a company fails to tell its story, you hear phrases like, "These reporters don't get it. Who is responsible for the strategy in this company? We have great technology, but need marketing help." The CEO doesn't have to be the creator of the vision, nor does she have to be the creator of the story, but she must be the keeper of the vision and the story. As such, the CEO ensures that the company's story is clear and compelling. The story is not the mission statement. The story does not have to be succinct. It is a story. Companies can take as long as they need to tell it, but they must tell it and it must be compelling. A company without a story is usually a company without a strategy. Want to see a great company story? Read Jeff Bezos' 3-page letter he wrote to shareholders in 1997. In telling Amazon's story in this extended form, not as a mission statement, not as a tagline, Jeff got all the people who matter on the same page as to what Amazon was about: decision-making. Some employees make products, some make sales. The CEO makes decisions. Therefore, a CEO can most accurately be measured by the speed and quality of those decisions. Great decisions come from CEOs who display an elite mixture of intelligence, logic, and courage. As already noted, courage is particularly important because every decision that a CEO makes is based on incomplete information. At the time of any given decision, the CEO will generally have less than 10% of the information typically present in the post hoc Harvard Business School case study. As a result, the CEO must have the courage to bet the company on a direction, even though she does not know if the direction is right. The most difficult decisions are difficult precisely because they will be deeply unpopular with the CEO's most important constituencies. The best decision that I made in my career, to sell the Loudcloud business to EDS and become Opsware, would have lost by a landslide had I put it to a vote with my employees, my investors, or my customers. As CEO, there is never enough time to gather all information needed to make a decision. You must make hundreds of decisions, big and small, in the course of a typical week. You cannot simply stop all other activities to gather comprehensive data and do exhaustive analysis to make that single decision. Knowing this, you must continuously and systematically gather knowledge in the company's day-to-day activities so that you will have as much information as possible when the decision point arrives. In order to prepare to make any decision, you must systematically acquire the knowledge of everything that might impact any decision that you might make. Questions such as, what are the competitors likely to do? What's possible technically and in what time frame? What are the true capabilities of the organization and how can you maximize them? How much financial risk does this imply? What will the issues be given your current product architecture? Will the employees be energized or despondent about this promotion? Great CEOs build exceptional strategies for gathering the required information continuously. They embed their quest for intelligence into all of their daily actions, from staff meetings to customer meetings to one-on-ones. Winning strategies are built on comprehensive knowledge gathered in every interaction the CEO has with an employee, a customer, a partner, or an investor. 2. Can the CEO get the company to do what she knows? If the CEO paints a compelling vision and makes fast, high-quality decisions, can she then get the company to execute her vision? The first ingredient in being able to do this is leadership, as I outlined in the section, Follow the Leader. In addition, executing well requires a broad set of operational skills. The larger the organization, the more elaborate the requisite skill set. In order for a company to execute a broad set of decisions and initiatives, it must have a capacity to do so. In other words, the company must contain the necessary talent in the right positions to execute the strategy, be a place where every employee can get things accomplished. The employees must be motivated. Communication must be strong. The amount of common knowledge must be vast, and the context must be clear. Is the CEO building a world-class team? The CEO is responsible for the executive team plus the fundamental interview and hiring processes for all employees. She must make sure the company sources the best candidates and the screening processes yield the candidates with the right combination of talent and skills. Ensuring the quality of the team is a core part of running the company. Great CEOs constantly assess whether they are building the best team. The output of this capability is the quality of the team. It's important to note that team quality is tightly tied to the specific needs of the company and the challenges it faces at the point in time it faces them. As a result, it's quite possible that the executive team changes several times, but the team is high quality the entire way, and there is no attrition problem. Is it easy for employees to contribute to the mission? The second part of the evaluation determines whether the CEO can effectively run the company. To test this, I like to ask this question: how easy is it for any given individual contributor to get her job done? In well-run organizations, people can focus on their work and have confidence that if they get their work done, good things will happen both for the company and for them personally. By contrast, in a poorly run organization, people spend much of their time fighting organizational boundaries and broken processes. While it may be quite easy to describe, building a well-run organization requires a high level of skill. The skills required range from organizational design to performance management. They involve the incentive structure and the communication architecture that drive and enable every individual employee. When a CEO fails to scale, it's usually along this dimension. In practice, very few CEOs get an A on this particular test. Netflix's CEO, Reed Hastings, put great effort into designing a system that enables employees to be maximally effective. His presentation of this design is called Reference Guide on Our Freedom and Responsibility Culture. It walks through what Netflix values in their employees, how they screen for those values during the interview process, how they reinforce those values, and how they scale this system as the number of employees grows. 3. Did the CEO achieve the desired results against an appropriate set of objectives? When measuring results against objectives, start by making sure the objectives are correct. CEOs who excel at board management can succeed by setting objectives artificially low. Great CEOs who fail to pay attention to board management can fail by setting objectives too high. Early in a company's development, objectives can be particularly misleading since nobody really knows the true size of the opportunity. Therefore, the first task in accurately measuring results is setting objectives correctly. I also try to keep in mind that the size and nature of the opportunity varies quite a bit across companies. Hoping that a hardware company can be as capital-light as a consumer internet company, or trying to get Yelp to grow as fast as Twitter doesn't make sense and can be quite destructive. CEOs should be evaluated against their company's opportunity, not somebody else's company. Let me share a funny story that illustrates a CEO really owning delivering against results. This story is from Robin Li, CEO of Baidu, China's biggest search engine company. In a lecture he gave at Stanford University in 2009, Robin recalls that on the day of Baidu's IPO, usually one of an entrepreneur's most exhilarating days in his entire life, he sat at his desk terrified. Why? Listen to how Robin owned delivering results. In 2004, we raised our last round of VC money, led by Draper Fisher Jurvetson, and Google, one of our great colleagues. Then a year later, in 2005, the company went public. The ideal price was $27, and it closed on the first day at $122. It was great for many of the Baidu employees and for all the Baidu investors. It was a very miserable thing for me because when I decided to take the company public, I was only prepared to deliver financial results that matched the price of $27 or maybe a little higher, $30, $40. But I was really shocked to see that the price went to $122 on the first day. So that meant I needed to deliver real results that matched an expectation much higher than what I had prepared to do. But in any case, I thought I had no choice. So I put my head down and focused on operations, focused on technology, focused on the user experience, and I delivered. Once we've taken all of this into account, we see that the results against objectives, or black box results, are a lagging indicator. And as they say in the mutual fund prospectuses, past performance is no guarantee of future results. The white box CEO evaluation criteria. Does the CEO know what to do? And can the CEO get the company to do it? We'll do a much better job of predicting the future. Closing thought. CEO evaluation need not be a Byzantine, unarticulated art. All people, including CEOs, will perform better on a test if they know the questions ahead of time. Chapter 8. First rule of entrepreneurship. There are no rules. That don't kill me can only make me stronger. I need you to hurry up now. 'Cause I can't wait much longer. I know I gotta be right now. 'Cause I can't get much wronger, man. I've been waiting all night. Now that's how long I've been on you. Kanye West. Stronger. When we were in the process of selling Opsware, HP's initial bid came in at $14 per share. BMC countered with $14.05. Then HP countered them with $14.25. John O'Farrell and I planned our strategy for closing the bidding process. We figured that if we executed correctly, the winning bid would come in at $15 per share or higher. Everybody was extremely excited. Then disaster struck, or more specifically, our auditor, Andreessen Young, nearly destroyed the deal. During BMC's diligence process, they discovered that we had accounted for 3 deals differently than they had. Specifically, each of our 3 deals contained something that can be known in the industry as the CA clause in honor of the infamous software company Computer Associates, or CA for short. The CA clause had come about as a result of some of CA's business practices. Apparently, CA had tricked their customers by selling them maintenance contracts that gave them rights to free upgrades forever for products named X. CA would then change the name of product X to product Y and charge their customers for an upgrade the customers thought they were entitled to for free. It was very clever and totally dirty. To fight back, savvy customers started requiring all software vendors to include the CA clause in their contracts. The clause stated that if you release a new version of your software that contains all the functionality of the previous version, plus some new features and a new name, then that product would be covered under the existing contract with no additional fees due. There were 2 possible ways to interpret the CA clause. You could either interpret as it was intended, as a workaround for CA's bad behavior, or you could interpret as a promise of future functionality. If you interpreted it as the former, then you were required to recognize all the revenue up front. If you interpreted it as a latter, then you would recognize the revenue ratably over the course of the contract. In either case, cash payments would be the same. We understood this ambiguity when we signed the 3 deals that contained the clause. So we had our E&Y partner, Dave Price, audit the deals and then tell us how we should account for them. Dave correctly understood the intent and recommended that we take the revenue up front in all 3 deals. BMC's E&Y partner concluded the opposite, and they accounted for similar deals ratably. When alerted to the difference, the BMC partner escalated the issue to Ernst & Young's national office. E&Y's national audit partner called me to report that he now disagreed with his partner's audit and required that we restate revenue guidance in the next 48 hours. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Restating revenue would tank the stock price and destroy the pending sale. The accounting had no material impact on cash flows, and our treatment was based on the judgment of Ernst & Young in the first place. If they had accounted for it the other way initially, the stock price would be the same as it is now. It was the restatement that would kill us. What the hell? I calmed down and replied carefully. Ben, the accounting is meant to reflect the intent of both us and our customers in the contract, correct? E&Y, correct. Ben, so why don't we call all 3 customers on the phone and ask them their intent? If it's what Dave Price reflected in our contracts, then we'll leave them as they are. If it's something else, we'll restate revenue. E&Y, no, that's not good enough. You'll need to get all 3 customers to amend their contracts to use new language that we've come up with at E&Y to clear things up. Ben, but all 3 customers are large banks. They have risk departments. They won't just amend their contracts quickly. To make things worse, we are in the middle of a $1.6 billion transaction. You will wreck our deal. E&Y, we don't care. That's what you have to do. Ben, but we've been a customer for 8 years, paid you millions of dollars in fees, and your partner made this judgment to begin with. Why would you destroy our transaction if we and the customers verbally agree with the current interpretation? E&Y, Either amend the contracts or restate your revenue. You have 48 hours. Dave Price looked like he was going to burst into tears. E&Y's national office did not care about the spirit of the law, only the letter. They refused to do what was right from an accounting or business standpoint. They were determined to do what was optimally convenient for Ernst & Young. My CFO, Dave Connie, was pale as a ghost. Hundreds of people had worked for 8 years to get to this point, and it looked like all that work would be flushed down the toilet by the accounting firm that Dave handpicked. He had worked at Ernst & Young for 15 years before joining Opsware. Normally gregarious and outgoing, he could barely speak. I was furious at everybody, but I knew that nothing that I could say would help the problem or make Dave feel any worse than he already felt. I turned to Jordan Breslow, my general counsel, and said, "Do we have to disclose this to the acquirers right away?" Horrifyingly, he said, "Yes." We told HP and BMC about the discrepancy and that we thought we could resolve the issue by amending the contracts in the next 24 hours. Neither party believed US. I don't know if I believed it. How could we possibly get 3 large banks to amend their contracts in 24 hours? Both potential buyers made plans to respond to news and update their position and possibly their bids. In the meantime, Dave, Mark Cranny, and I went to work to get the contracts amended. We sat in the finance conference room drawing lines between everybody we knew in the world and tried to figure out how to get to the right people in time to save the deal. I called every board member to see which bank he kept his money in and whether he had any influence or knew somebody with influence. Mark stayed on the phone with the sales reps and the people whom we knew at the accounts. Jordan and Dave came up with 10 different ways to word the amendment. We stayed up all night working on the deal, and the entire time, Dave looked as though he was having a massive heart attack. Miraculously, by 11 a.m., we got all 3 contracts amended, and it was in less than 24 hours. We would not have to restate revenue. Not surprisingly, the entire thing spooked BMC, and they withdrew their bid. They did not believe that the issue had been put to bed. HP wasn't spooked, but they lowered their offer to $13.75 per share due to the taint on the deal. That night, the board met in our offices to discuss the new offer from HP and inform them that BMC had dropped out. The board was unanimous in its advice that we should take the $13.75 offer. I disagreed. I said that I would not take a nickel less than the $14.25 originally offered. Bill Campbell looked at me like I was a general who had spent too much time in the field. At that point, I had not slept and didn't know if he was right or wrong. I just knew that I had waited all night to be right, and I couldn't get much wronger. I gathered myself and restated my position. HP offered $14.25, a price that equals 16 times trailing 12 months revenue for one reason and one reason only. They offered it because we are the premium company. The gold standard, if you will, in an important market. That is the entire premise of this deal. The second that we accept a discounted offer or in any other way suggest that we are not the gold standard, this deal falls apart. John O'Farrell nodded in agreement. The board uneasily accepted my position. I went back to HP and told them the deal would be $14.25 or nothing. After about a 2-hour pause, during which time the color never returned to Dave Connie's face, they accepted. We had a deal for about $100 million, less than if our so-called partner had not stabbed us in the back, but a deal nonetheless. I still hate Ernst & Young. I am telling this story today because just when you think there are things you can count on in business, you quickly find that the sky is purple. When this happens, it usually does no good to keep arguing that the sky is blue. You just have to get on and deal with the fact that it's going to look like Barney for a while. Solving the accountability versus creativity paradox. A software engineer identifies a weakness in your current product architecture that will significantly impair its ability to scale down the road. She figures out that she'll have to slip the product schedule 3 months to fix it. Everybody agrees that 3 months is an acceptable slip to correct the problem. The schedule actually slips 9 months, but she was right about the problem. Do you reward her for her creativity and courage, or hold her accountable for the slip? If you become a prosecuting attorney and hold her to the letter of the law on her commitments, you will almost certainly discourage her and everybody else from taking important risks in the future. If you take this stance consistently, don't be surprised in the future if your people don't have time to solve hard problems because they will be far too busy covering their butts. On the other hand, if you don't hold her accountable for her commitment, then the people who actually do the work to meet their commitments might feel like idiots. Why did I stay up all night making a deadline if the CEO rewards a person who missed their schedule by 6 months? If you're hardest working, most productive employees feel like chumps and you are looking for the culprit, look in the mirror. You have failed to hold people accountable for their actions. Welcome to the accountability versus creativity paradox. As we look to solve it, let's start with the most basic assumption. Do you assume that your employees are by and large creative, intelligent, and motivated? Or do you assume that they are lazy, conniving, and counting the minutes to quitting time? If you believe the latter, then you might as well just give up on creativity and innovation in your organization, because you will not get it. It's better to believe the former and assume that people have good intentions unless they prove otherwise. Still, you must hold people accountable to avoid the chump factor. How do you think about that? Let's look at accountability across the following dimensions: promises, results, and effort. Accountability for effort. This is an easy one. To be a world-class company, you need world-class effort. If somebody isn't giving it to you, they must be checked. Accountability for promises. A lot of good running organizations have statements like, make a commitment, keep a commitment. It's true that if you sign up for something and you don't do it, you let everyone in the organization down. This type of letdown can be contagious. Holding people accountable for their promises is a critical factor in getting things done. This changes as a degree of difficulty in fulfilling the promise increases. Promising to complete a piece of marketing collateral or send an email is different from promising to meet an engineering schedule that involves solving some fundamentally hard computer science problem. You must hold people accountable for the former. The latter is more complicated and relates to results. Accountability for results. This is where things get complicated. If someone fails to deliver the results she promised, as in the opening story, must you hold her accountable? Should you hold her accountable? The answer is that it depends. It depends upon seniority of the employee. You should expect experienced people to be able to forecast their results more accurately than junior people. Degree of difficulty. Some things are just plain hard. Making your sales number when your product is inferior to the competition and a recession hits mid-quarter is hard. Building a platform that automatically and efficiently takes serial programs and parallelizes them so that they can scale out is hard. It's hard to make a good prediction and hard to meet that prediction. When deciding the consequence of missing a result, you must take into account the degree of difficulty. Amount of stupid risk. While you don't want to punish people for taking good risks, not all risks are good. While there is no reward without risk, there is certainly risk with little or no chance of corresponding reward. Drinking a bottle of Jack Daniels and getting behind the wheel of a car is plenty risky, but there's not much reward if you succeed. If someone missed a result, did she take obviously stupid risks that she just neglected to consider, or were they excellent risks that just did not pan out? Revisiting the opening problem. So looking back at the opening problem, here are some things to consider. 1. How senior is she? If she's your chief architect, you'll need her to get better at scoping her work, or she's going to trash the organization. If she is more junior, this should be more a teaching moment than a scolding moment. 2. How hard was it? If it was a miracle that you ever made that piece of crap scale, then you shouldn't yell at her. In fact, you should thank her. If it was a relatively trivial project that just took too long, then you need to address that. 3. Was the original risk the right one to take? Would the product really have run out of scale in the short to medium term? If the answer is yes, then whether it took 3 months or 9 months, it was the right risk to take, and if faced with the same situation again, you probably should not change any of your actions. You shouldn't be wringing your hands about that. Final point. In the technology business, you rarely know everything up front. The difference between being mediocre and magical is often the difference between letting people take creative risk and holding them too tightly accountable. Accountability is important, but it's not the only thing that's important. The Freaky Friday management technique. Many years ago, I encountered a particularly tricky management situation. Two excellent teams in the company, customer support and sales engineering, went to war with each other. The sales engineers escalated a series of blistering complaints arguing that the customer support team did not respond with urgency, refused to fix issues in the product, and generally inhibited sales and customer satisfaction. Meanwhile, the customer support group claimed that the sales engineers submitted bugs without qualification, did not listen to valid suggested fixes, and were alarmists who assigned every issue the top priority, beyond the actual complaints. The teams genuinely did not like each other. To make matters worse, these groups had to work together constantly in order for the company to function. Both teams boasted superb personnel and outstanding managers, so there was nobody to fire or demote. I could not figure out what to do. Around this time, I miraculously happened to watch the motion picture classic Freaky Friday, starring the underrated Barbara Harris and the incomparable Jodie Foster. There is also a high-quality remake starring Jamie Lee Curtis and the troubled but talented Lindsay Lohan. In the film, mother and daughter grow completely frustrated with each other's lack of understanding and wish that they could switch places, and, through the magic of film, they do. Through the course of the movie, by being inside each other's bodies, both characters develop an understanding of the challenges that the other faces. As a result, the two become great friends when they switch back. After watching both the original and the remake, I knew that I had found the answer. I would employ a Freaky Friday management technique. The very next day, I informed the head of sales engineering and the head of customer support that they would be switching jobs. I explained that, like Jodie Foster and Barbara Harris, they would keep their minds but get new bodies permanently. Their initial reactions were not unlike the remake, where Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis both scream in horror. However, after just 1 week walking the other's moccasins, both executives quickly diagnosed the core issues causing the conflict. They then swiftly acted to implement a simple set of processes that cleared up the combat and got the teams working harmoniously. From that day to the day we sold the company, the sales, engineering, and customer support organizations worked better together than any other major groups in the company, all thanks to Freaky Friday, perhaps the most insightful management training film ever made. Staying great. As CEO, you know that you cannot build a world-class company unless you maintain a world-class team. But how do you know if an executive is world-class? Beyond that, if she was world-class when you hired her, will she stay world-class? If she doesn't, will she become world-class again? These are complex questions and are made more complex by the courting process. Every CEO sets out to hire the very best person in the world and then recruits aggressively to get him. If he says yes, she inevitably thinks she's hit the jackpot. If I had a tattoo for every time I heard a CEO claim that she just hired the best VP in the industry, I'd be Lil Wayne. So we begin with a strong bias that whoever we hired must be world-class even before performing 1 day of work. To make matters worse, executives who start off world-class often deteriorate over time. If you're a sports fan, you know that world-class athletes don't stay world-class for long. 1 day you are Terrell Owens, and the next day you are Terrell Owens. While executives don't age nearly as fast as athletes do, companies, markets, and technologies change 1,000 times faster than the game of football. As a result, the executive who is spectacular in this year's 100-person startup may be washed up in next year's version when the company employs 400 people and has $100 million in revenue. The standard. The first thing to understand is that just because somebody interviewed well and reference checked great, that does not mean she will perform superbly in your company. There are two kinds of cultures in this world. Cultures where what you do matters, and cultures where all that matters is who you are. You can be the former, or you can suck. You must hold your people to a high standard. But what is that standard? I discussed this in the section Old People. In addition, keep the following in mind. You did not know everything when you hired her, While it feels awkward, it is perfectly reasonable to change and raise your standards as you learn more about what's needed and what's competitive in your industry. You must get leverage. Early on, it's natural to spend a great deal of time integrating and orienting an executive. However, if you find yourself as busy as you were with that function before you hired or promoted the executive, then she is below standard. As CEO, you can do very little employee development. One of the most depressing lessons of my career when I became CEO was that I could not develop the people who reported to me. The demands of the job made it such that the people who reported to me had to be 99% ready to perform. Unlike when I ran a function or was a general manager, there was no time to develop raw talent. That can and must be done elsewhere in the company, but not at the executive level. If someone needs lots of training, she is below standard. It is possible to take the standard setting too far. As I discuss in the section, the scale anticipation fallacy, it's neither necessary nor a good idea to evaluate an executive based on what her job will be 2 years from now. You can cross that bridge when you come to it. Evaluate her on how she performs right here and right now, on expectations and loyalty. If you have a great and loyal executive, how do you communicate all this? How do you tell her that despite the massive effort and great job she is doing today, you might fire her next year if she doesn't keep up with the changes in the business? When I used to review executives, I would tell them, "You're doing a great job at your current job, but the plan says that we will have twice as many employees next year as we have right now. Therefore, you will have a new and very different job, and I will have to reevaluate you on the basis of that job. If it makes you feel better, that rule goes for everyone on the team, including me." In providing this kind of direction, it's important to point out to the executive that when the company doubles in size, she has a new job. This means that doing things that made her successful in her old job will not necessarily translate to success in the new job. In fact, the number one way that executives fail is by continuing to do their old job rather than moving on to their new job. But what about being loyal to the team that got you here? If your current executive team helped you grow your company tenfold, how can you dismiss them when they fall behind in running the behemoth they created? The answer is that your loyalty must go to your employees, the people who report to your executives, your engineers, marketing people, salespeople, and finance, and HR people who are doing the work. You owe them a world-class management team. That's the priority. Should you sell your company? One of the most difficult decisions that a CEO ever makes is whether to sell her company. Logically, determining whether selling a company will be better in the long term than continuing to run it standalone involves a huge number of factors, most of which are speculative or unknown. And if you are the founder, the logical part is the easy part. The task would be far simpler if there were no emotion involved. But selling your company is always emotional and deeply personal. Types of acquisitions. For the purpose of this discussion, it is useful to think about technology acquisitions in 3 categories. 1, talent and/or technology. When a company is acquired purely for its technology and/or its people. These kinds of deals typically range between $5 million and $50 million. 2, product. When a company is acquired for its product, but not its business. The acquirer plans to sell the product roughly as it is, but will do so primarily with its own sales and marketing capability. These kinds of deals typically range between $25 million and $250 million. 3, business. When a company is acquired for its actual business. The acquirer values the entire operation, not just the people, technology, or products. These deals are typically valued by their financial metrics and can be extremely large. My take on the subject is most applicable to business acquisitions, with some relevance to product acquisitions, and will be fairly useless if you are selling people and/or technology. When analyzing whether you should sell your company, a good basic rule of thumb is if you are very early on in a very large market and you have a good chance of being number one in that market, then you should remain standalone. The reason is that nobody will be able to afford to pay what you are worth, because nobody can give you that much forward credit. For an easy-to-understand example, consider Google. When they were very early, They reportedly received multiple acquisition offers for more than $1 billion. These were considered very rich offers at the time, and they amounted to a gigantic multiple. However, given the size of the ultimate market, it did not make sense for Google to sell. In fact, it didn't make sense for Google to sell to any suitor at any price that the buyer could have paid. Why? Because the market that Google was pursuing was actually bigger than the markets that all the potential buyers owning Google had built a nearly invincible product lead that enabled them to be number one. Contrast the situation with Pointcast. Pointcast was one of the first internet applications to catch fire. They were the buzz of Silicon Valley and the technology industry in general. They received billion-dollar acquisition offers that they passed on. Then, due to flaws in their product architecture, their customers started to turn off their application. Overnight, their market collapsed and never returned. They were ultimately sold for a relatively tiny amount. So, the judgment that you have to make is, one, is this market really much bigger than has been exploited to date? And two, are we going to be number one? If the answer to either one or two is no, then you should consider selling. If the answers to both are yes, then selling would mean selling yourself and your employees short. Unfortunately, these questions are not as simple to answer as I've made them out to be. In order to get the answer right, you also have to answer the question, what is the market really? And who are the competitors going to be? Was Google in the search market or the portal market? In retrospect, they were in the search market, but most people thought they were in the portal market at the time. Yahoo was a tough competitor in the portal market, but not so much in the search market. If Google had really been in the portal market, then selling might have been a good idea. Pointcast thought that their market was much larger than it turned out to be. Interestingly, Pointcast's own product execution caused their market to shrink. Let's look at the case of Opsware. Why did I sell Opsware? Another good question is, why didn't I sell Opsware until I did? At Opsware, we started in the server automation market. When we received our first inquiries and offers for the server automation company, we had fewer than 50 customers. I believe that there were at least 10,000 target customers and that we had a decent shot at being number one. In addition, although I knew the market would be redefined, I thought that we could expand in networks and storage faster than the competition and win that market as well. Therefore, assuming 30% market share, somebody would have had to pay 60 times what we were worth in forward credit to buy out our potential. You won't be surprised to find that nobody was willing to pay that. Once we grew to several hundred customers and expanded into data center automation, we were still number one and were more valuable standalone than any of the prior acquisition offers. At that point, both Opsware and our main competitor, BladeLogic, had developed into full-fledged companies. This was significant because it meant that a large company could buy one of us and potentially execute successfully. Big enterprise companies can't generally succeed with small acquisitions because too much of the important intellectual property is the sales methodology, and big companies can't build that. At this point, it became clear that BMC was going to buy either Opsware or BladeLogic. As a result, the calculus, or whether Opsware was going to be number one in the market, needed to be redefined as follows. 1. We had to be number one in the systems and network management market rather than the data center automation market. Because like the word processor market, the data center automation market was going to be subsumed by a larger market that contained it. 2. In order to be number one, we had to beat BMC and BladeLogic together, which was a significantly more difficult opponent than either company standalone. Finally, the market itself was transforming due to an underlying technological shift: virtualization. Virtualization meant that the entire market needed to be retooled, so we were embarking on a new R&D race to build the best management for virtualized environments. This meant deferring earnings for a very long time. Based on all these factors, it made sense for us to at least consider the possibility of acquisition and run a short process to understand the interest in the Manda market. Through that process, 11 companies made acquisition offers of some form. This told me that we were at a local maxima in terms of the market price for Opsware. In other words, the set of potential buyers was convinced that the market was very important and there was no extra premium that we could hope to achieve through better awareness. In the end, based on a lot of analysis and soul-searching, I determined that the current local maxima was higher than we could expect to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years, and I sold the company to Hewlett-Packard for $1.65 billion. I think and hope that was the right decision. The funny thing about the emotional part of the decision is that it's so schizophrenic. How can you ever sell your company after you've personally recruited every employee and sold them on your spectacular vision of a thriving, standalone business? How can you ever sell out your dream? How can you walk away from total financial independence for yourself and every member of your close and distant family? Aren't you in business to make money? How much money does one person need? How can you reconcile Dr. Stay the Course and Mr. Sell the Thing? Clearly they are reconcilable, but the key is to mute them both. A few keys on muting the emotions. Get paid. Most venture capitalists like entrepreneurs that are all in, meaning the entrepreneur has everything invested in the company and will have very little to show for her efforts if it does not succeed. As part of this, they prefer the founding CEO to have a very low salary. In general, this is a good idea because the temptation to walk away when things go poorly is intense and total financial commitment helps him to keep his other commitments. However, once the company starts to become a company rather than an idea, it makes sense to pay the CEO at market. More specifically, once the company has a business and becomes an attractive acquisition target, it makes sense to pay the CEO so that the decision to keep or sell the company isn't a direct response to the CEO's personal financial situation. As in, I don't think that we should sell the company, but I live in an 850 square foot apartment with my husband and 2 kids, and it's that or divorce. Be clear with the company. One question that every startup CEO gets from her employees is, are you selling the company? This is an incredibly difficult question. If she says nothing, the employee will likely interpret this to mean the company is for sale. If she says at the right price, the employee will wonder what that price is and may even ask. If the company ever reaches that price, the employee will assume the company will be sold. If she dodges a question with a standard, the company is not for sale, the employee may feel betrayed if the company is ever sold. More important, the CEO may feel like she is betraying the employee, and that feeling will influence her decision-making process. One way to avoid these traps is to describe the analysis in the prior section. If the company achieves product market fit in a very large market and has an excellent chance to be number 1, then the company will likely remain independent. If not, it will likely be sold. This is one good method to describe the interests of the investors in a way that's not at odds with the interests of the employees. And it is true. Final thought. When faced with a decision of whether to sell your company, there is no easy answer. However, preparing yourself intellectually and emotionally will help. Chapter 9. The End of the Beginning. We walked the same path, but got on different shoes to live in the same building, but we got different views. Drake, right above it, after selling Opsware, I spent a year at HP running the bulk of their software business. And then I tried to figure out what to do next. Should I start another company? Should I be CEO of someone else's company? Should I retire? Should I do something completely different? The more I thought about my future, the more I thought about my past. What would have happened if I'd never met Bill Campbell? How would I have possibly worked my way through all the challenges I'd faced? Why was entrepreneurship such a black art? Did everybody have the same problems I'd had? If they did, why did anybody write anything down? Why did so few startup advisors and venture capitalists have any experience starting companies? As these thoughts rolled around in my head, I sent Mark Andreessen an instant message. We ought to start a venture capital firm. Our motto for general partners would be, some experience required, as in some experience in founding and running companies is required to advise people who are founding and running companies. To my surprise, he replied, I was thinking the same thing. Some experience necessary. Further contemplation took me back to one of my first serious encounters with venture capital. Back in 1999, after raising our first round of funding for Loudcloud, my co-founders and I went to visit our new venture capital firm and meet their full team. As founding CEO, I remember being excited to meet our financial backers and to talk about how we could partner to build a great company. The conversation took a sharp downhill turn when one of the senior partners, David Byrne, asked me, in front of my co-founders, "When are you going to get a real CEO?" The comment knocked the wind out of me. Our largest investor had basically called me a fake CEO in front of my team. I asked, "What do you mean?" hoping he would revise his statement and enable me to save face. Instead, he pressed on, "Someone who has designed a large organization, someone who knows great senior executives and brings pre-built customer relationships, someone who knows what they are doing." I could hardly breathe. It was bad enough that he had undermined my standing as CEO. But to make matters worse, I knew that at some level he was right. I didn't have those skills. I had never done those things. And I did not know those people. I was a founding CEO, not a professional CEO. I could almost hear the clock ticking in the background as my time running the company quickly ran out. Could I learn the job and build my network fast enough, or would I lose the company? That question tortured me for months. In the years that followed, I remained CEO, for better or worse. I worked incredibly hard to become the kind of CEO that everyone expected, thanks to a lot of effort and help from friends and mentors, especially Bill Campbell. The company survived and became successful and valuable. Not a day went by, however, when I didn't think about that interaction with David Byrne. I always wondered how long I had to grow up and how I could find help to build my skills and make the necessary connections along the way. Mark and I discuss this paradox often. We wonder aloud why as founders we had to prove to our investors beyond a shadow of a doubt that we could run the company, rather than our investors assuming that we would run the company we created. This conversation ultimately became the inspiration for Andreessen Horowitz. To get started, we studied the venture capital industry, and we came across a potential problem with our approach. Historically, all the returns in venture capital have been concentrated in a tiny number of firms and consistently by a small number of the same firms. Of the more than 800 venture capital firms of the day, only about 6 had delivered great returns for their investors. As we dug deeper, we uncovered an excellent reason for this. The best entrepreneurs will only work with the best venture capital firms. Since venture capital firms were notoriously secretive about their methods and beliefs, most firms did almost no PR and stated very little about what they did. The firms competed on their investing track records. Therefore, the firms with the best track records continue to have the best track records, thus making it nearly impossible for a new firm, with no track record, to crack into the top tier. We needed some way to break through, to become the firm that great entrepreneurs wanted to work with. But how? We needed to change the rules by which entrepreneurs evaluated VCs. We thought there was an opening to do this, because times had changed. When Mark and I first became entrepreneurs back in the mid-1990s, we did not know many other entrepreneurs. We just did what we did without really seeing ourselves as part of a larger movement or community. We were entrepreneurs at the beginning of the internet and before Facebook, Twitter, and the other social networking platforms were built. We did not talk to other entrepreneurs because there was no entrepreneurial community. We were completely heads down on the business. All that has changed in the last 10 years. Entrepreneurs are now socializing, friending each other, meeting up, and hanging out. There is a real community. Once we realized this, we figured that if we had a better offering, word-of-mouth marketing would work now where it hadn't before. We needed to be better, but we also needed to be different. As we thought about what would make us both better and different, 2 core ideas greatly influenced our thinking. First, technical founders are the best people to run technology companies. All of the long-lasting technology companies that we admired, Hewlett-Packard, Intel, Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, had been run by their founders. More specifically, the innovator was running the company. Second, it was incredibly difficult for technical founders to learn to become CEOs while building their companies. I was a testament to that. But most venture capital firms were better designed to replace the founder than to help the founder grow and succeed. Mark and I thought that if we created a firm specifically designed to help technical founders run their own companies, we could develop a reputation and a brand that might vault us into the top tier of venture capital firms despite having no track record. We identified two key deficits that a founder CEO had when compared with a professional CEO. One, the CEO's skill set managing executives, organizational design, running sales organizations, and the like were all important skills that technical founders lacked. Two, the CEO network professional CEOs knew a lot of executives, potential customers and partners, people in the press, investors, and other important business connections. Technical founders, on the other hand, knew some good engineers and how to program. Next, we asked, how might a venture capital firm help founder CEOs close those gaps? Addressing the skill set issue proved to be difficult because, sadly, the only way to learn how to be a CEO is to be a CEO. Sure, we might try to teach them skills, but learning to be a CEO through classroom training would be like learning to be an NFL quarterback through classroom training. Even if Peyton Manning and Tom Brady were your instructors, in the absence of hands-on experience, you get killed the moment you took the field. We decided that while we would not be able to give a founder CEO all the skills she needed, we would be able to provide the kind of mentorship that would accelerate the learning process. As a result, we decided that all of our general partners would need to be effective mentors for a founder striving to be a CEO. Of course, not all founders want to be CEO. For some companies, the right thing is to bring in a professional CEO. For those companies, we would focus on helping the founders identify the right CEO, and then helping the CEO successfully integrate into the company and partner with the founders to retain their unique strengths. This is why so many of the general partners we choose are former founders or CEOs or both, and they are all highly focused on helping founders become outstanding CEOs. The idea seemed so simple and obvious that it had to work. Next, we decided to systematize and professionalize the network. For this, we drew both the inspiration and the formula from my friend and Opsware board member Michael Ovitz. 34 years earlier, Michael had founded Creative Artists Agency, the powerhouse of Hollywood talent agencies. When Michael started CAA, it was not an obvious idea. The talent agency business had existed since vaudeville and had changed very little in the ensuing 75 years. Michael was a rising star at the William Morris Agency, the most important agency in the industry at the time. Quitting that job to pursue what must have looked like a windmill tilt made no sense to anybody. But Michael had a clear vision. If he could build a firm so good that it attracted all the top talent in the world, then he would shift the economics of the industry from the corporations to the talent, where he felt that it belonged. The firms of the day were essentially collections of loosely affiliated talent agents. Agents worked under the same umbrella, but acted largely alone, each agent tapping into her own network on behalf of her own clients. For example, Agent A might introduce Dustin Hoffman to the head of Warner Brothers. But both the relationship with Dustin Hoffman and the relationship with Warner Brothers were controlled entirely by the agent. Other William Morris agents and clients didn't automatically get access to either. This traditional model sounded a lot like the traditional venture capital business, where VCs worked in the same firm but managed their own networks and their own portfolios. Ovitz's breakthrough idea was to build an integrated network that would allow any of the firm's agents to connect their clients to a firm-wide grid of new opportunities. As a result, the firm would be 100 times more powerful than any one agent at any other agency. To implement the idea, Ovitz and his founding partners agreed to defer their salaries for several years and invest their commissions into building what Ovitz referred to as the franchise. The franchise consisted of specialists running networks and portfolios in each relevant area: book publishing, international, music, and more. His theory worked, and within 15 years, CAA represented 90% of the top talent in Hollywood and had rewritten the rules, giving talent more say in deals and a bigger piece of the financial pie. We decided to copy CAA's operating model nearly exactly. In fact, Andreessen Horowitz employees have the same titles as the original CAA employees' partner. Michael thought it was a great idea, but he was the only one. Everyone else offered some variation of the following: "This is Silicon Valley, not Hollywood. You guys don't understand the business." Still, with Michael's endorsement and enthusiastic support, we pushed forward with the idea. As we applied it to venture capital, we decided to build the following networks. Large companies, every new company needs to either sell something to or partner with a larger company. Executives, if you succeed, at some point you need to hire executives. Engineers in the technology business. You can never know enough great engineers. Press and analysts, we have a saying around the firm. Show it, sell it, hide it, keep it. Investors and acquirers being venture capitalists. Providing access to money was obvious. Once we designed the firm, we needed to help entrepreneurs understand how we were different. This seemed tricky because no major venture capital firm did any marketing of any kind. We figured there must be a good explanation for this, but struggled to find one. Finally, Mark discovered that the original venture capital firms in the late 1940s and early 50s were modeled after the original investment banks, such as J.P. Morgan and Rothschild. Those banks also did not do PR for a very specific reason. The banks funded wars, and sometimes both sides of the same war, so publicity was not a good idea. This insight, combined with our general instinct to counter-program whatever the big guys were doing, led us to launch Andreessen Horowitz with great fanfare. When deciding on the name, the biggest problem we faced was that, as a firm, we were nobodies. No track record, no portfolio companies, no nothing. But people knew us, and they especially knew Mark. So I said, rather than trying to create a totally new brand from scratch, why not just use your brand? Mark thought that made sense, but nobody would ever be able to spell Andreessen Horowitz when typing in the URL. Thinking back to old-time computer programming, in the days before programming languages supported internationalization, we used to have to internationalize our code. We called this internationalization process I-18N for short, which meant I followed by 18 letters followed by N. We decided that the firm's nickname would be A16Z, as in followed by 16 letters followed by Z. We hired the Outcast marketing agency, headed up by its formidable founder, Margaret Wemichers, to generate media interest. We needed people to know what we were about, as we had decided to defy the conventional venture capital theory of no PR. The daughter of a German pig farmer, Margaret was the furthest thing from a swine wrangler imaginable, smart and sophisticated. She was the Babe Ruth of PR. She worked her contacts, landing a cover story in Fortune in 2009 that featured Mark posing as Uncle Sam. Andreessen Horowitz was an overnight sensation, and yet Mark and I were still the only two people in the firm. After 8 years of running Loudcloud and Opsware, I had learned so many hard lessons that building the team was easy. I understood the importance of hiring for strength rather than for lack of weakness, and I understood the meaning of fit. There are lots of smart people in the world, but smart is not good enough. I needed people who were great where I needed greatness. I needed people who really wanted to do the jobs they were hired for, and I needed people who believed in the mission to make Silicon Valley a better place to build a company. The first person we hired was Scott Cooper, who had been the director of finance from Opsware. Scott worked for me for nearly the entire 8 years, and I'm not sure that he enjoyed any of it, but he performed phenomenally nonetheless. He ran customer support, planning, and technical field operations during those years, but none of the jobs were what he wanted to do. Scott loved 3 tasks: running things, strategy, and deals. If he could do those things, he'd almost never sleep. But at Opsware, he'd only gotten to do 2 of the 3. Not getting to work on transactions was torture for Scott. He was like a caged animal, and I kept him in that cage for 8 long years. So, when we designed the firm, the first thing that came to my mind was I finally found the perfect job for Cooper. Scott became the firm's chief operating officer. We then filled out the rest of the team. We hired Mark Cranny, head of sales at Opsware, to run the large company network. Shannon Callahan, former head of recruiting and HR, to run the engineering network. Margaret Wemichers, the Sultan of SWAT, to run the marketing network. Jeff Stump, the best executive recruiter we knew, to run the executive network. And Frank Chin, my former head of product management, to run a centralized research group. Our theory about what a venture capital firm should offer turned out to resonate with the best entrepreneurs in the world. In 4 very short years, we have gone from nothing to being one of the most respected venture capital firms in the world. Final lesson. I know you think my life is good cause my diamond piece, but my life been good since I started finding peace. NAS, locomotive. I often joke that I am considered to be a much better CEO now than I was when I was actually CEO. These days, people sometimes refer to me as a management guru, but when I managed Opsware, most people refer to me as, well, less than that. As Felicia is fond of saying, they called you everything but a child of God. What happened? Did I change or did perception change? There is no question that I learned a great deal over the years, and I am pretty embarrassed about how I conducted myself in the early days. But by the end, I became pretty good at running the company. There's plenty of evidence supporting this view. I completely changed our business midstream, even while it was a publicly traded company, and still managed to grow its value from $29 million to $1.65 billion in 5 years. A large percentage of the employees from Opsware either work for me at Andreessen Horowitz or in one of our portfolio companies, so they must have liked something about working together. The acquisition by HP was the largest outcome in the sector, so we won our market. Still, during the years that I was good at running Opsware, from 2003 to 2007, you would be hard-pressed to find a single article or blog post or message board comment that said anything nice about me. During that time, the press declared the company dead, and shareholders called for my resignation. No, I was not considered to be very good at all. In retrospect, people's perceptions changed because of the sale to HP and the things that I've since written. Once I stopped being CEO, I was granted a freedom that I did not have before. As a venture capitalist, I have had the freedom to say what I want and what I really think without worrying what everybody else thinks. As a CEO, there is no such luxury. As CEO, I had to worry about what everybody else thought. In particular, I could not show weakness in public. It would not have been fair to the employees, the executives, or the public company shareholders. Unrelenting confidence was necessary. When we started Andreessen Horowitz, I could let all that go. Sure, we still have employees, but we do not have public shareholders who live and die on every piece of press. More important, at Andreessen Horowitz, I am not really CEO. We invest in companies that have CEOs. The burden of unrelenting confidence lies with them. I can now share my weaknesses, my fears, and my shortcomings. I can say what I want without worrying about offending the wrong people in the power structure. And it's those fears and controversial opinions that hold the clues to dealing with hard things. Hard things are hard because there are no easy answers or recipes. They are hard because your emotions are at odds with your logic. They are hard because you don't know the answer, and you cannot ask for help without showing weakness. When I first became a CEO, I genuinely thought that I was the only one struggling. Whenever I spoke to other CEOs, they all seemed like they had everything under control. Their businesses were always going fantastic, and their experience was inevitably amazing. I thought that maybe growing up in Berkeley with communist grandparents might not have been the best background for running a company. But as I watched my peers' fantastic, amazing businesses go bankrupt and sell for cheap, I realized that I was probably not the only one struggling. As I got further into it, I realized that embracing the unusual parts of my background would be the key to making it through. It would be those things that would give me unique perspectives and approaches to the business. The things that I would bring to the table that nobody else had. It was my borrowing Chico Mendoza's shocking yet poetic style to motivate and focus the team. It was my understanding of the people underneath the persona and skin color that enabled me to put Jason Rosenthal together with Anthony Wright to save the company. It was even my bringing into the most capitalistic pursuit imaginable what Karl Marx got right. On my grandfather's tombstone, you will find his favorite Marx quote, "Life is struggle." I believe that within that quote lies the most important lesson in entrepreneurship. Embrace the struggle. When I work with entrepreneurs today, this is the main thing that I try to convey. Embrace your weirdness, your background, your instinct. If the keys are not in there, they do not exist. I can relate to what they're going through, but I cannot tell them what to do. I can only help them find it in themselves. And sometimes they can find peace where I cannot. Of course, even with all the advice and hindsight in the world, hard things will continue to be hard things. So, in closing, I just say peace to all those engaged in the struggle to fulfill their dreams. With this, the book is now complete. Thank you for listening.